Letters fly off a spinning globe from the US, UK, and Australia to spell SGK Studios present an Audio Pizza production.
We've got a serious topic coming up on Audio Pizza, and no, I'm not talking about Android accessibility. I'm talking about blindness, loss of vision, and the toll it takes on our mental health. Hopefully, you'll find something that will resonate with you. Coming up next on Audio Pizza. Hello, Kayaker here from the springtime Northeast. I'm so happy. I know Sean hates talking about the weather, but damn, it's looking good. We've got a show for you today regarding blindness and mental health, and we're looking forward to that because Sean knows all about this. Right, Sean? Over in Manchester in the UK where it's, I don't know, what is it? Do you actually have a government, or is it just like barbarians running over the place? What's it like there, Sean?
I mean, people in glass houses, Mr. 1984
I know.
government. I've just listened to the Secretary of Health describe autistic people as not being able to go to the toilet unaided, and I just can't believe what's happening at the minute. Anyway, yes, this episode is, I'm going to say, it makes me uneasy because I know nothing. Now, listeners will know that already, but I know nothing about mental health at all. So we need an expert. And luckily enough, we've got one. And joining us today is Sally. Hello, Sally Clay. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys?
We're good, thanks, Sally. Welcome back.
You might recognize Sally as the voice of the narrator from our Christmas Scrooge episode. And she's also a counselor over in the UK with a degree. Can you tell us a little about your background on that front and what you've been doing since we last spoke? Way back when, I think, in the Blind Guy Talks Tech, right?
That's right, yeah. I used to be one of the crazy people on that podcast, and just at the end of that, when that finished, I went off and did a master's in counselling and psychotherapy. I just want to point out that I'm not actually an expert in mental health, but what I have done is study a lot of it, and the whole master's point of view was from the perspective of a person-centered therapist, which basically means you put the client, not the patient, but the person at the center of your intervention. So essentially what you do, if you imagine someone's in a car, they are driving, but their window's foggy. And in order for them to carry on driving, they need someone to help unfog the window so they can see where they're going. That's kind of my job.
Well, that's sort of been my experience driving a car.
Yeah, well, it's really foggy in my case. In fact, it's completely black, but that's fine.
Well, we'll try to keep this a little bit light, but, we say you're not experts, but we're all at least experts in experienced blindness and dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. And I think from that perspective, we've all have our stories and we all have our demons in our mind and things that drive us crazy, and sometimes coping with that can be challenging. And we sort of got into this a little bit at the end of the last episode where, Sean was talking about his travels and Sarah, his partner, was just going out, and we sort of stopped and said, that's an interesting thing. And maybe we should talk into it because it's something that we deal with every single day.
Well, when it comes to blindness, though, mental health is a big issue. And not just when it comes to blindness and disability. Mental health still got the stigma to it. No one wants to admit they're struggling at any point. But I think it would be disingenuous for all of us to say that we've never struggled, because I think you just do. There's so many different aspects to disability, whether it be social isolation, really difficult to get out there and meet people, or just feeling awkward, or the acceptance of having a disability and not becoming who you thought you were going to be. Listen to me being all serious here. But it's just so wide-ranging, I think. Because, Kayaka, you come across to me as a particularly confident guy. Is there anything you struggle with or used to struggle with that you don't anymore? Or is there something that you still find an issue when it comes to mental health?
At least with struggling in that regard, I'd say I might come across as being confident, but I am not. I am very conservative and cautious when I travel. What I have to do is I have to force myself out of my comfort zone, and that's the kick in the pants. I am able to kick myself and get over my fears and say, okay, I've got to do this. This needs to get done, and then I do it. But just walking and navigating is not an easy experience for me. I am mentally stressed after each walk because I'm just on hyper alert, to protect my health. And whether it's falling down a flight of stairs, which I have done, and nothing can shake your confidence like, doing something like that and set you back.
Yes.
It is a struggle every single day. And I think it's okay. It's, we are at a disadvantage because we're missing critical information that most people get through their eyes. We have to compensate, and the compensation for those missing information isn't always perfect, and we're prone to make mistakes. And I think for me, that can make me feel extremely frustrated. It can make me a little bit angry, and I feel sometimes I can feel awkward. I just sometimes will just feel awkward when I'm out and about.
Yeah, but isn't that okay? I mean, we'll throw this to Sally in a minute, but it's okay, right, to feel frustration, anger, and I suppose the problem comes along when that stops you doing things, when it comes to a level of anxiety where I can't go out. I physically can't go out, right?
I don't think I've hit that point per se. Like I say, I do have the capability of sort of sucking it up and just forcing myself out. I was at that point. Okay, I think I've told this story in the past, but I traveled a lot, and I think there's a different story for people who are born blind versus people who are losing their sight gradually. I think there's two paths there, and I think their experiences are quite different when it comes to things. But for me, taking flights, going around, looking at things, navigating stuff, it got harder and harder and harder as places got on. At one point, I was thinking to myself, hey, you haven't really traveled in a while. I think you're getting scared to do it on your own. And, that's a problem. That's something that you enjoy doing. And you've got to tough it up and get out there. And this was right when the NASA space shuttle was about to be retired. So I was able to get tickets to one of the last launches down in Florida. And that was my goal. And I forced myself to travel for the first time solo when I was really, really needing the cane, and my vision was really bad to the point where, I couldn't really leverage it as much as I used to get around. And that was an extremely anxious and challenging trip for me. And I had, thinking back, I can remember my heart just pounding and feeling that little rush of adrenaline or anxiousness as if you're about to jump on stage and perform. And it was hard to, get in the Uber to get to that airport for the first time. And I had all these preconceived ideas of what was going to go wrong or what the hard parts were going to be.
Oh, yes.
And
that's our Achilles heel, right? Playing it through in your mind.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. How am I going to do this? Yeah.
Right. And the funny part is, until I actually did it, I was completely wrong with what was the hard part was going to be. I thought the air travel was going to be the hard part. Airports are so set up for assistance these days that was actually the easiest part of the trip. The hard part was the hotel navigation, which I did not expect because I just figured that was a building. But as you know, a lot of hotels, resorts, they're big open spaces. I mean, you had this problem at CSUN, right? It was so big, it's easy to get spun around. You're off by a little bit. You just don't know where you're going. And it's sometimes the hardest part is just navigating the hotel from the front door to your room. But getting out and having that experience just sort of said, okay, you could do this. And I did hit some snags along the way, but they were manageable, laughable. And at the end of it, I felt such a high that it sort of gave me the confidence and to continue doing it. So yeah, that was my initial experience. But I know not all people have that power to sort of get past their fear and sort of take the next step, because it's scary and it can be dangerous if you don't have the right attitude. And
then you feel shame and guilt for not doing it. Like you're failing at even being a blind person, right? So it's really tricky. Is there any sort of, I don't know, what's the strategy for those sort of anxiety and fear feelings, Sally? Is there anything, or is it individual?
Well, I mean, I want to go back a little bit because the things that you're both talking about are something that I, as somebody that works as a volunteer counsellor for a sight loss charity in the UK, I see all the time the things that you're talking about, and to such an extent that when we first start as a volunteer counsellor in that capacity, we have to undertake 2 days training, which to me seems like, very small amount. But from my point of view, a lot of the training was covering things that I already knew because I'm a visually impaired person myself, and having been born partially sighted, but then having to go through some level of sight loss, even if it was a small amount, was that, actually this whole journey that you're talking about is comparable to a bereavement. So essentially what you're talking about is grief. And as counsellors, we already have sort of a model for that, sort of understanding it. Of course, grief doesn't work according to a nice, easy, discrete set of criteria that you move along the grief continuum. But what's happened is that over time, we've sort of realised in the field that sometimes the stages of grief can follow a particular trajectory, starting at sort of shock and denial, going through sort of anger and depression. And as you realise what's happened to you, you start to, and I think that's where what you're talking about here is the kind of anxiety and depression, as you kind of navigate this difficulty with accepting it, which to me doesn't seem like any kind of mental health pathology. It seems like a natural reaction to a really difficult thing that's happened to you, the loss of a sense. If you think about the animal kingdom or whatever, the loss of a sense is going to put you in the position of being under threat. So of course your body's going to have throw all these sorts of things out and resources to try and protect you, which when you're in the middle of a hotel and you're by yourself, you don't really, and you're blind, you're not able to run. You're not able to get angry and shout at people and hit things or fight people.
Who says? Who
I know,
can?
right? I mean, I know you two might try, especially you, Sean. But, I think that we do tend to sometimes, what you were talking about there was part of the fight, flight, freeze response. You're talking about freezing, essentially. When you don't go out, you freeze, you're scared. And whilst, you might think of that as weak, or some of us in society might see that as a weakness, actually, in some ways, you almost might see that as the beginnings of self-protection, and your body, as your body learns to understand itself in a new way, you're having to protect it yourself. The difficulty is, of course, when you never go out because you're too scared, and when that provides some kind of difficulty for you in the world, and the strategy with that, like you say, Sean, it's quite individual, because my line of counselling in particular, we don't tend to strategize. I don't tend to throw out strategies to people, tell them what to do, and then they go away and do their homework, and then they come back. It's all about finding those strategies. I know. Well, I can give you homework if you want.
That's all. Do this and you'll be fine.
Isn't there a pill we can take?
And that's what everybody wants when they come, because of course you're feeling awful, and you are hoping for that quick fix. I've had so many people say to me, I want strategies. And I say to them, well, so what do strategies look like for you then? And then by the time we've got to sort of session 4 or 5, they're going, well, actually, I don't know what I was thinking when I was thinking about strategies, because actually all I want to do is stop feeling this pain that I'm feeling. So the long answer is strategies, no, I don't have individual strategies. But I mean, there are obviously things you can do. And I think the first step is knowing we're talking specifically, I think, about sight loss here, and I do want to make the distinction between sight loss and blindness, because I think that whilst they converge in many ways, I think that they are visual impairment and sight loss. Obviously, one results from the other, right? But I think that there's congenital blindness as well, and I think there's areas of difference there. But the bulk of my work as a counsellor with blind people comes from the sight loss area. But I think there are other challenges that are faced by blind people who are born blind or have congenital visual impairment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? That's a good place. Why don't we start there? Because the common story is that if you're born blind, you're far more leveled with it, far more accepting of it than if you're losing your sight over time. Is that generally true? I mean, it seems to make sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? And it's really interesting, actually, because, I mean, I am not going to speak for the whole of the UK, and I don't have access to any kind of definite research on this. But what I definitely know from my own experience versus others, and that everybody's so different. But what I do know is there are particular challenges that I've heard about that are faced by people who are losing their sight, namely the sort of grief, acceptance, the reforming of identity. They're having to create a new self. So it's almost like being reborn in a way, and having to be reborn without sight. And that sounds maybe a bit melodramatic, but I think it is. There is some kind of a rebirth there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas so some of those things that you're learning to do is things like go out, you're having to adjust to your body in a different way. And that is something that I, as somebody who was born with sort of 5% vision, all of which has gone now, I haven't had to deal with that rebirth in the same way. But I think that there are elements that you guys maybe, I'm making big assumptions here, but having grown up with sight, you'll have reference points that I just don't understand. So people start talking about dancing, clothes, body language. I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. I have no idea about dancing apart from about 10 things that people have told me that you could write on a pencil case. And that has caused me a huge amount of anxiety, because you're especially as a teenager, teenage girl, you want to know how you look. It's all about looking for selecting a mate, if you like, or selecting somebody that, going to a school disco or whatever. And you just feel like an absolute idiot. And I think that there's different challenges there. But I think where the areas of convergence are is generally about access to everything actually, access to the world, and also public perception. I think they're the areas of convergence. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. Yeah, but I think, you mentioned there when you kicked off, you mentioned about it's almost a period of grief, right? And maybe I'm just assuming, and we're going to use that word a lot, I'm sure, because we can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I assume that if you're born without sight, then you don't have that sense of loss, maybe. You still have all those other, as you mentioned, converging problems and issues that we all face at some point when it comes to access to ... But maybe that grief is less, and is that grieving process, that adjusting to, it's another year and now I can't do this. Is that the major?
Yeah, we don't have that. If you're born blind, you just don't have that. That same thing. I think that there's a different kind of. I think society grieves for you. I think that society assumes that you do. I think that's the difficulty. Is that you can almost infer grief where there's none. If that makes sense. Like you say, you'll look at the world and I mean, even I've done it myself with that small amount of sight loss that I had. I went home last week and suddenly looked around and thought, I used to be able to see all the different houses. I used to know when to turn on the road based on, I'd know where the post office was because it was white.
Yeah.
And I looked and I was like, I don't know where the post office is anymore. Hold on a minute. I'm going to have to listen for the echo. I'm going to have to echolocate the door now and count the doors. And right, okay, this is a bit. But you're right. I don't have that grief. It's just another lateral thinking exercise for me. Whereas for you guys, you're talking about when you're noticing these bodily reactions or these situations happening, rather, your body will react in a way that is quite painful, I guess.
Yeah, it certainly can be painful to deal with the grief part. And, you did talk about the people who were born blind. And I think we do know that developmentally, when a baby is born and they're blind, that they are, as their brain develops, this is clear that, should they gain their sight back in life, they've missed the developmental phases to process that information properly, so that even if they can see, they might not understand what they're seeing the same way someone who has sight. So there's definitely a different path and a different set of feelings and frustrations, I think, for someone who's been, like you, Sally, from essentially as a child without sight to someone who's lost the sight. And I think that's a good distinction.
It almost feels wrong to say it, but I am going to say it. So people who are losing their sight are more likely to really struggle with mental health than someone who has been blind from birth. Is that a stereotype that we can say, yeah, you know what, generally that's probably true?
I think they're different areas. I don't think I would say that at all. I think I would say that they're different areas of mental health. I think what you're talking about there, I would say definitely what you're driving at, or what I'm inferring from that, is that you're saying perhaps grief, in the area of grief, that's something that people who are losing their sight are dealing with, and that's an area of mental health that's sort of the trauma of that is definitely something that that is worse, I think, for people who are losing their sight, and that loss it's a very particular area of mental health that we're dealing with there. And I think you're right, that is a part that people who are born blind, and again, I don't want to speak for everybody, don't have. But I think that there are things that if you've grown up blind, you can go to a school, for example, you can go through the whole of school and have no friends. And again, that's not the case for everybody, but it can be. I've heard about it a lot. I've experienced it.
Yes.
And that has its own level of grief and sadness about it. Its own level of mental pain, I guess. And then, or there'll be things like, just you'll know yourselves from places where you face discrimination. You've gone into a bar and they've said, well, sorry, you can't come in because, or maybe a nightclub or something, you can't come in because you're blind.
I'm a fire hazard. Yes, I've had that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you count that over 45, 50, 60 years or whatever, if you've been born blind, you've had to deal with that from birth. Whereas perhaps if you've had sight, you haven't had to deal with that. So I wouldn't go so far as to say, mental health is better amongst people that are born blind than people who lose their sight. I just think it's different problems that we're struggling with.
Yeah, I think there's if you look at the set of pain points for someone who's blind from birth versus who's losing their sight, those sets probably overlap, but they're different buckets on each side. I never thought about missing I know what the body language is. Little facial, twinkle in the eye, little indications that can communicate so much that you just have no reference point. If you were born blind, you would understand it. I didn't even think of dance and all that stuff. It's Sean and I, at least since we could see back when we were younger enough to,
yeah, I can do the
those
robot.
Things.
Yeah. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
The worm, that's easy.
Yeah. Well, now granted, there's the nerd factor who couldn't really dance anyway, but
yeah, right. The nerd, the dancing in the corner.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like...
No, but it's such a great point you made there. And look, I don't want people to listen to this and say, oh, I can't believe, let's say me or any of us have said something that's upset anyone, right? We're talking about, there's a lot of assumptions going on here. There's a lot of generalizations. But, what I just said there about mental health probably affecting people who are losing their sight more than people who've been blind from birth. I mean, you are so right, Sally, about that social isolation. I mean, as I said at the beginning about it being wide-ranging, that can be as damaging as anything. How many times have we heard about people who just don't see anyone else, don't leave the house, and that does affect you.
It does. You mentioned something earlier on, both of you. I think it was you, Kayaka. You mentioned about, sort of putting your best foot forward and kind of pushing through and being positive in a way. And I think this is, again, one of the areas of convergence, whether you have congenital blindness or not. And I'm going to try and sort of not make these distinctions. I think it's important to note that these distinctions exist in experience, between people who are congenitally blind and people who are who have acquired vision loss.
Oh, acquired.
But I think that there are these big areas of convergence. And I think one of the big areas of convergence is this forming of the proxy self, which is like the forming of the self that is like, I'm fine. Everything's good. I'm not going to succumb to the tide of negativity that society offers me on this plate of pity. I'm going to be fine, thank you very much. But I think there are elements of that we're so busy convincing society that we're fine all the time, in order to put forward a positive image of blindness. I think that we can sometimes forget when we're not fine, and then we don't process our own difficulties, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so
I
true.
think whilst it's important to put forward a positive image of blindness, and I want to offer people hope that maybe somebody listening to this and they've just lost their sight. Of course, it's not all hopeless, but I think we'd gain a lot more by being honest with ourselves when we do find it difficult and acknowledging those areas of difficulty.
Absolutely.
I joined a RP group on a social media platform recently. And I'll be honest with you, I was quite shocked at the majority of the posts on there are all for a fix, food to eat, eat this food, or, how can I... Basically, it's people saying, how do I stop this from happening? How do I reverse this? And I remember those times so well. And it wasn't just me, of course, when your child or family member is diagnosed with something like this, everyone is looking, we can fix this. This isn't going to happen. Again, I suppose this comes down, talking of the stages. This is
it's the denial, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just going back and looking at those posts, I was thinking, it just takes me back so much to most of my childhood of just denial and something's going to happen. In 20 years, they'll fix this. It's amazing what they can do. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help. And I think the quicker you can get through that and get to acceptance, the better. But, I say that, and it must have took me decades to get to acceptance. If you ever fully do, I don't know.
I think you can't rush acceptance, can you? It's about your body. So your intellectual brain, your sort of front brain can say, oh, yes, I accept this. But of course, your amygdala in the back of your brain, sort of reptilian or the animal part, is not going to be able to do that. It takes time to adjust. It's obviously got to understand that life's not a threat. You're not going to, nothing's going to actually happen to you. You're not going to come to harm. But I don't think the back brain understands that. I really don't. I feel like that's what takes the time to understand and process.
Is there a way to approach that? I'll be honest with you, part of me wanted to go on there and post, you're going to lose your sight. No one knows how long, how much, over what period of time you are going to lose your vision. And then I stopped myself. Of course I did, because that just seems just harsh, just rude, right? But is that an approach at any time? Almost Kayaker's telling himself there when he's thinking about going out to pull himself together. Is that ever the right thing to say? Pull yourself together, get over it. Just get out there and do it. That can't be that's
well, it's certainly not something
wrong.
I would say to a client. I would never say that to a client. Pull yourself together.
What's the matter with you?
Yeah, come on, just grow a pair. Come on. No. That's never something that I would say. I think that realism has to come from the person. That acceptance. It's like if you ask someone to stop smoking, they're not going to until they're ready. And I feel like if you're going to, I've had so many people say to me, look, if I just eat some more carrots, I'm going to be able to see. And you're like, okay, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how's that going to work for you then? How's that working out for you? But I don't think I would ever say to somebody to pull themselves together, because all that does really is just increase their fear and make
their
them
sense of failure,
I
suppose, as well.
Well, yeah, or just the fact that that's probably what they're saying to themselves hundreds of times a day. Pull yourself together, come on, and actually there's that conflict there between the intellectual part of them that knows that they need to, and the brain that the body, the rest of the body, or the animal part of them that just can't, because they're dealing with the bodily threat that's posed by losing a sense. And I do really think it all comes back, from my point of view, and again, every therapist or person's going to have a different view anyway, but from my point of view, it all comes back to that base fear of threat and how you approach that.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't just jump in the deep end and say, suck it up, pull it together. It's a process. You try to take small steps a little bit at a time. And I think the best thing that helped me was just having other people who were in my situation sort of giving me a little bit of encouragement. When I took that trip, I just started to, sort of expand out, because I didn't really know anyone else who was blind in my physical real world. Mailing lists and other things popped up back in the day where, there's RP lists and technology lists for computers and screen readers and stuff that I was on. And I started to build up some online friends who would exchange stories and have similar things. And they almost gave me the motivation or the little bits of confidence, but it was not just like, I'm going down to the space shuttle launch. It's sort of like, okay, let's let's walk around the block, and you know what, tomorrow let's walk around the block and go a little bit further, half block. So slowly expanding and branching out and sort of becoming more familiar with techniques for navigation and exploring unknowns. It's not just, hey, drop me in the middle of the city and let's have fun and see what happens. That would freak me out. And I know, well, I think, Sally, you're a good example. I've heard you like, I need this ingredient. I'm just going to go, I know this store has it, and I'm just going to run ahead and go for it because that's what I'm going to do. And I don't always have that type of confidence. I need to like slowly, do a quarter, half, 3/4, and maybe the full thing over a long period of time. And I don't have your enthusiasm or confidence to go out, but I'm guessing there's also some buried fear, even though you project that confidence. Is that safe to say, or how do you feel when you're doing that?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the sort of body confidence comes from years and years. So I was born with, like I say, a small amount of partial sight, probably about 5% of what a sighted person would see, maybe a bit less even in one eye. And so up to the age of about 11, I was able to use that vision to some degree, but I've never had distance vision. And obviously only having vision on the one side, I was still able to develop echolocation, which is a way of navigating using sound echoes. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but in this small fragment of time, that's how I'm going to explain it. But yeah, I think that the fact that I didn't have any distance vision meant that I had to develop mental maps over a long period of time. So I had a very long time to get used to doing that anyway. And then my vision started to really deteriorate, or at least I noticed it deteriorate when my first colours went up when I was 9. And then by the time that I was sort of 20, I had none, really. No discernible vision, apart from I could see a zebra crossing or a tissue, and then I'd smack into a tree. But, and now I have none. So the point of that is to say that over time, I think with that slow loss of vision came, but together with that early experience of echolocation and body confidence, that body confidence grew. But I did have to go through, like you two are talking about, a phase of real pain and going into. So I remember going into a bank when I was about 15, and I walked in and I thought, oh, it'd be fine. I'll be able to find the door like I always have. And I came back out and I couldn't find the door anymore. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to do it. But I think that early foundation of knowing, oh, you can just feel the cold air then, gave me a bit of a head start in terms of lateral thinking. But in terms of going back to that question, do I feel the fear? Yes, I do. And over the past few years with the introduction of electric cars, I've actually been hit twice by cars, and just because I haven't been able to hear them, and that has given me a lot of fear. But despite that, I will still go out every day, and I don't know if it's just the way I've been brought up or the way in which I react to fear in general. Most of the time, with the exception of fairground rides, I'll pretty much do anything that I'm scared of. Anyway. I'm terrified of the waltzers. Don't make me go on the waltzer. Like, I'll jump out of a plane or whatever, but don't make me go on the waltzer.
The waltzers? I thought you were going to say a roller coaster.
I'm terrified.
You just get spun
I'm scared of roller coaster. I can't even go on the waltzer. Like, I won't even go on the teacups.
Spinny ones are bad.
Terrified.
Yeah. Right, let's make that happen. Pull yourself together.
No, I know, right? Oh, they're horrible.
Well, going off what you've both said there, is the answer to overcoming a lot of this, and I use overcoming in air quotes, I mean, is gaining those skills, those tools, right? Once you get the O&M, those tricks, but to get there, you need to come to the acceptance and get over the denial, right? It's almost a vicious circle, isn't it?
I think you hit the nail on the head to some extent. I think that there's no quick fix for any of this, and whether it's I want to learn to write a computer program for the iPhone, or I want to learn how to build a bookcase, or I want to learn how to navigate when I can't see. I think you need to take time and learn and progress to gain the skills that you need to become more confident. You still might not build, a bookcase that's, beautiful and well done, but I bet you it'll hold books at some point. So I think just making small steps and knowing that in order to get to where you want to be, it does take time, it does take skills, and you do have to learn. And I think everyone has the potential to learn. Some people will be fantastic, some people will be less than fantastic, but every step forward, so to speak, figurative and literally, is a win for you, and it'll slowly, at least it did for me, improve my confidence, even though I still have that fear every single day that I go out.
I feel like that fear is healthy. I feel like part of that fear, I think when it becomes panic is when it's not healthy, or at least when it becomes too much for you to manage. But I think a certain amount of fear, I mean, I tend to call it vigilance, is quite healthy because, again, it comes back to our need to be safe and our need not to feel that to be threatened by our environment. You know, a saber-toothed tiger coming to get us, or a car that's about to hit, you know, we need that extra level of vigilance. And I think the hard thing for us is, as visually impaired people, whether you've lost your sight or whether you haven't, is the self-care that we need when we've had a busy day, especially if we go out a lot, to come home and say, right, I'm going to go to bed early tonight. I'm not going to be silly. I'm not going to do the things. Kayaka's going to laugh at me because he knows what I'm like, that I never look after myself and I'm always out. But, you know, I'm not going to do silly things that stop me from recovering, because there is a certain amount of energy extra, I feel, that we as visually impaired people use. And it's so easy for us to hit burnout, I think, whereas a sighted person may just go to the shops and get in the car, drive to the shops, do the shopping, come back. We've got so many extra things to think about. Yeah. That does inevitably take its toll. So we need to look after ourselves that little bit more.
I so agree with that. I almost think sometimes that sighted people don't understand how hard everything is that we do every day, and how much more on edge the simplest task to do, the toll it takes on our mental just stamina. Like you said, just going to the store and coming back is an exhausting experience. And if a sighted person sees you doing it, they're like, oh, okay, they can handle that. They're kind of normal. And I just think of the amount of time and energy and anxiety. It just, mental stress and wear and tear is a real thing. And I think I need some time to just sort of recover, throw on the classical music and just sort of like, I'm back. I did it, task done. And I think sometimes
classical music. You're so highbrow.
All right.
Yeah, we've all got Britney Spears or whatever. He's got Brahms. From yes. Britney to Brahms.
I got a little Britney in there too. So sorry.
Okay, let's say you manage to, okay, I'm positive thinking. I'm gonna go out and I want to do whatever it may be. And I think something that's so important is those little victories, right? And taking them, no matter how small they are. I remember a friend of mine ringing me up and saying, I just went to the ice cream van and got an ice cream. I was outside my house and got back to the house. And he was so happy about it. And absolutely he should be, because I'm thinking about that. Okay, how do I find that window where that ice cream van is? How do I know there's not a queue of children that I'm just going to trample over Godzilla style? There, and how do I make my way back with a cane and ice cream and all this? I could only get one. I can't get one for the rest of the family because I haven't got enough hands. That's our thought processes. You do need to plan stuff out. And I think those little victories are just so important. And just to say, you know what, I did that. And that's cool. I know it may not be a big deal to anyone else, but to me, that's massive. And I think just recognizing that is a good thing, right?
I would agree. Yeah. And I think there's something really funny about the ice cream van, isn't it, for a blind person? Because not only you got to, for a start, you think, oh, that's fine, it's got music. So you go and look for the music, and of course it's gone round about 4 other corners and the music's still going. So you're like running around this, trying to find the ice cream van. And then when you found it, you're right, you've got to navigate 15 kids or whatever, none of whom know what a white cane's for. So my thoughts around that are definitely celebrate the victories. And I've often said that to people that I work with, my clients and stuff, and just other people that I know who are blind and who are struggling through that sort of navigating that sight loss, is celebrate your victories, because damn right, we're awesome. I'm sorry, but there's just times when you just, you've had a hard day or whatever and you've gone out there and you've got the ice cream. And I used to make a big thing about going and getting my boss and somebody else a coffee. And invariably, I'd come back with some of it on my leg or something. Somebody had whacked into me, but it was a thing that I always wanted to do, was to go and get the coffee for somebody, because you feel like I just want to have that, be part of the machine, even though you spend so much of your life not wanting to be a part of the machine. You know, you don't want to be part of the system, you don't want to conform, but actually as a blind person, sometimes it's nice just to be a useful part of that entity, you know.
Totally. Sometimes it's just nice to just be ignored and not seen as a blind person. Yeah.
Is it? I mean, I suppose that takes us on to another aspect. I mean, how many times have you been at a social gathering and just felt totally alone, totally isolated?
I hate them.
Constantly thinking, okay, where's the way out? Where's the toilet? Who's this next to me? You know, I can feel something against my leg. Is that a table? Is that a person? I'm almost petrified to the spot sometimes. And, you know, you try and be sociable, but as you just sort of mentioned before, Kayaker, you know, you're unable to make eye contact. Is someone talking to me? I can't really hear. Are they talking to me? And you just feel awkward. Is that just the way it is? I mean, I can't think of a technique where that isn't just how it is if you're visually impaired in that sort of situation.
I think there's an element of that, isn't there, that is acceptance again, that you're saying, right, baseline, I'm going to accept that perhaps certain situations are not ideal for me, because somewhere where there's lots of loud music, you can't hear anybody and you can't see. How likely are you to get enjoyment out of that, really? And who are you doing it for? So, you know, my strategy around that has been to make trade-offs around, okay, how often will I do that? If I do feel like I need to do it because I want to be in with people, or I want to feel like I'm not snubbing people if that's where they go to socialise, I'll go for a bit or something like that, then I'll go home. So I kind of put my face, you know, put my head around the door and say hi, whatever, you know, stay there for a bit and then go. But as you get older, I think there's something about being selective and being okay with what your boundaries are in that respect. Because why, again, what is, I think there's sometimes an expectation that we should have the same experience as sighted people. And that experience for us is just not, it's not going to be the same. And I think that these clashes of acceptance come from the fact that we don't always find it easy to adapt to the fact that we are not sighted. Or I think it also, and I'm going to go on to this now, if I'm going too fast, then stop me. But I feel like this all comes back to our sort of perception of blindness in a way. Because, you know, I think we have this kind of perception of the sighted person, and we have this perception of the blind person. And I think a lot of our perception of blind person is informed by sort of the ableist narrative. I hate to say it, but or let's maybe not even say ableist, but informed by the kind of archetypal narrative that permeates society. You know, the blind person in dark glasses with the white stick sitting at home, or maybe reading a book or listening to Radio 4 or something like that. And I think some of the difficulties that we have acclimatizing to blindness are because of these archetypes. And one of the best things that happened to me, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Kayaka, was about having these role models, watching other people do the things that we have always wanted to do, and that we thought we couldn't because of how we perceive blindness. And actually we can. But I think clubbing and going out into these big social gatherings, I feel like that is an area where it's a bit like driving, you know, it's like, well, I can't drive. So what is our limitation there? What's the boundary where we're prepared to say no?
Well, not even like clubbing. Even if it's just like a birthday party, or, you know, just going to someone's weddings, these social gatherings with friends, or a reunion, or a office party, these social situations, I hate and loathe, because that's the time when I feel the most depressed. I try to avoid these things. I'll just, you know, politely decline, unless I have a couple friends that are really, really good with blindness, and, you know, they'll, you know, sort of keep an eye on me and make sure that, you know, that socially I'm not just sort of isolated. Because how many times have you been to one of those parties or groups where, you know, you're talking, someone walks away and they don't even think about it, and you're talking to no one, or you don't even know if someone comes up. I'm totally with you, Sean. That's the most anxious part, and it's so important for me, because we are social people. We're social creatures. I love to hear other people's stories and hear about their tales and adventures, and that's when we get to experience those types of things, even if it's just, you know, waiting in line with someone at the checkout counter, maybe just talking or something like that. But in social situations, parties, and it doesn't have to be a huge club event where you're just trying to go in and having fun. It can even within your social circle, if your friends and friends of friends can't handle the blindness, you can feel incredibly isolated. And that's when I feel that's definitely when I feel it in my heart and just get kind of low.
Yeah,
really
I would
tough.
agree with that. And I think I'm going to take my counsellor hat off now and sort of be human about this, that the only way that I have found, there are two ways that I've found to combat that. And one of them is this proxy version of me that's like, hi everyone, I'm going to be the life and soul, right? Come on then. And I'll get so larger than life that, it just has to be, people are just going to come and either I kind of do crazy dancing and do silly things. and that kind of means that people give me attention. But that is not actually who I am. And that is a proxy. That's a kind of faux version of me that's like, hi everyone, I'm just going to be this thing that means I get access to people, or I just have a couple of Prosecco's and forget all about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You feel
that's
like
what
you're
I do.
parked in the corner. You're either ignored, and every now and again someone will come over, say, are you okay? Do you need anything? And then, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's you almost crawl into yourself at some points there. It's so tricky. But I think some of that as well, you mentioned you've got some friends that are really good with blindness. And I mean, that is part of it as well, right? How other people treat you. I always remember when I was going to one of the many visits with my family with to the eye hospital, right? And I remember sitting in the waiting room and someone was there with their mother. And this guy must have been 20, in his 20s. And his mother was asking questions, but she was talking for him. And I was trying to talk directly to him. She started the conversation asking me questions. It's not like I just went, hey, hello. They started the conversation with me. But it was almost like he had no voice. He had no self to him. Do you know what I mean? And I still think that does happen quite a lot. And I think you brought it up earlier, Sally, that almost, the perception that, well, he's blind, so, it's almost a does he take sugar aspect to it. And if you're in that situation, families, of course, have always got your best, well, for the most part, got your best interests at heart. But sometimes it's not actually what's best for you. How do you deal with sort of educating other people or just getting across how you feel about it?
I think there's a lot under that, isn't there? Because there's not only your perception of blindness, but there's society's perception of you. And I think that's a biggie when you're losing your sight, is to deal with the sort of infantilizing part of the general public and how that affects you. Because again, this is part of being born blind. You've had that your whole life. So it's almost like sometimes you doubt your own validity as an adult, or certainly that's been my experience, to sort of doubt your own decision-making or your own capacity, as a human, your own sort of human value. And I think my strategy for that as an adult now has been to sort of educate the people that I'm close to. For example, my partner, I was like, you never, when we first got together, you never speak for me in public. You that is not allowed. That's a boo-boo, you do that, you're not gonna, well, anyway, but
No, let's concentrate on that. You're not gonna, okay, now let's move on.
Abstinence for a year. You're not getting any for a year. No, but you do that, you're not going to be in my good books. And I think this is about, again, it's a lot about personal boundaries here, because I will not be parked in the corner at a party. If I'm parked in the corner at a party, there's only going to be two things that are going to be keeping me there. One of them is that I'm exhausted. For example, when there's a kids' Halloween party, there's absolutely no need for me really to be the centre of attention. And if I don't talk to anybody, I'm really there for the kids, so I don't really care that much. But if it's a party or some element of a social gathering where I'm meant to be participating, I'm not going to sit in the corner. Nobody's going to make me, and I will find the action in the room. And it's difficult. Again, you've got to pay the price for that later. Maybe you're going to be tired, you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be grumpy or whatever, but it's worth it sometimes. But the speaking through you, I think there is a lot about the boundaries there. How much are you going to allow people to do that? And especially those close to you, it actually, we may not have to educate everybody, because like you said, there's enough that is tiring about this. Do we have to educate everyone? Do we need to educate every single person when they do it wrong? Are we going to pick our battles? Because we have limits. And again, it's about finding those limits and saying, right, this is what I will tolerate. Like if I get on a bus, I will not tolerate somebody talking to my partner instead of me. Where's she going? It's like, excuse me, you're talking to me. I will not tolerate that. It's not acceptable ever. But equally, if somebody wants to give my partner my card, sometimes I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I'm done. I don't need to fight that much.
Yeah.
Pick your battle.
Pick your battles.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right.
Is that what you guys find as well?
Totally.
I just think it's difficult. Going back to that example I gave of that I'm going to say kid because I'm in my 50s. But, that blind person who I just felt had no voice, right? Everything was answered through his mother. I don't know. It just made me feel uneasy at that point.
Yeah. Well, Sally, is it safe to say that in order to get out of a depressed state, that the person who is depressed needs to take some initiative? It's there's not something that you just turn a switch and make it so. If they don't want to get better, is there any way to help someone get better?
Well, this is what I was thinking actually when you were talking about that, Sean. And I think, Kayaki, you've hit on something there, because I think how quickly someone comes out of that state of grief or the state of depression or that state of distress is very much dependent on how much either I think it's going to be due to their environment or what environmental factors work against them, but also their own internal want or need. You talked about this guy, and the question that I immediately asked in my head was, how much, there's part of me that thought, oh goodness, that's awful for him, and it's not fair that he didn't have a voice or that somebody else was speaking for him. And you think, how much of that had he become acclimatized to, and how much was that his normal? If you know what I mean? Whereas for us, we're going, oh, no, that's not acceptable. But for him, was that acceptable? Was he okay with that? And I often come back to that with, with emotional distress or mental health, how much, the extent to which we are mentally not functioning is very much dependent on how much we perceive it. If we obviously there's limits to that. If somebody is in a psychotic state or whatever, right, and they're experiencing reality in a different way, then that might have implications on the wider world, in which case we might need to make an intervention. But in general, when we're talking about less severe emotional distress or whatever, we're talking about how much, the extent to which we need to intervene with that is very much dependent on how we feel it affects us. So if we don't feel that there's a problem, there's nothing really anyone else can do about it, unless, of course, there's a wider implication for society, if that makes sense.
So does it all boil down to the great Morgan Freeman's line, get busy living or get busy dying? So
that took us to a dark place.
Well, no, but
yeah, prepare for a bit of gallows humor.
I mean, it is a bit melodramatic, but to some extent, it's true. You either can go. Some people, I think, throughout history and in books and things that I've read, it's like there is a point where some people just give up, and there are other people who just sort of keep trying. So, you hear about in history books when, World War II, prisoners of war type stuff or things like that. There's some people who just keep on going, and there's some people just surrender and give up and can't cope. So you say that's a bit of a dark statement, but I think there's a little bit of underlying truth there that, and as Sally said, you need to want to improve and get better, or if you don't, then no one can really help you if you don't want to help yourself. Is that a fair statement, Sally? Yeah,
no, I think so. And I think there's one thing that I would say, and again, I'm only bringing my own situation in here because I think it's relevant. I mean, I've been to a point where, I've myself has been incredibly depressed, and extreme to an extreme level, and the only thing, I was kind of externalizing that, help me, everybody, help me. And it got to a point where everybody had left. I was in hospital and everybody had left. And I sat there and I thought, well, it's only me that's going to fix this now. There's not really, I've got two options here. Either I can sink or I can swim. This was very severe. And I chose to swim. And I think that it really was as simple as that. The choice had to be made. Do I choose to live or do I choose not to? And I think you choose to live and you go, right, okay, that's really the nuts and bolts of it at the end of the day. What do you choose? And the choice is very much, but I do think that people have to the extent to which we deal with any big event, and I think sight loss in particular is a big event when it happens to you, when the loss journey begins, how you deal with that is very much dependent on how we're equipped to deal with that, what tools we've been given by our environment, to some extent, I guess, the genetics, but I think that, mainly the environment and our upbringing, our life. I mean, I would say that, right? I'm a therapist, so of course I'm going to say it all comes back to your parenting or whatever. But I think a lot of it is your environment and what the tools your environment has given you in your early years and how you relate to that. Because grief and sight loss does have a tendency to bring that all back up. Any big experience, any big change, there are other experiences like that as well, having children or being in an accident or whatever. There are hundreds of them, but they all bring these other experiences you've had before preceding that to light, and how you deal with that very much depends on what you've been furnished with in the past as well.
So what resources are available for those who decide that they want to swim or they want to get busy living, but might not know where to start? What's available in the UK for you folks? How do people reach out to get the resources they need to achieve their goals?
Yeah, so there are quite a few different things available. I think when we're talking in more general terms, if you're feeling you need someone to talk to right now, or you're feeling lonely, isolated, or generally unwell, call the Samaritans on 116 123 if you're living in the UK. If you're talking about accessing mental health support specifically pertaining to sight loss, then the RNIB, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, have a counselling service that's bespoke for people going through sight loss at the moment. It is a 5-month waiting list or thereabouts, but they do offer up to 8 sessions for people experiencing emotional distress related to sight loss. The number to contact them on is 0207 391 2186.
So here in the States, your best options are probably working through your primary care physician to see what's available through your insurance plans, because it's crazy here, right? So, but more important, I think, are the support groups that are available through both the national organizations. The NFB and ACB will have resources available on their websites that you should check out if you need help as well. Also, the one that I tend to go to for my specific condition, RP, is blindness.org. That's the Foundation for Fighting Blindness. They also offer resources with coping with RP. So you can check those out here if you're in the States.
I want to also mention that the RNIB have a helpline, which you can access with any questions you've got around blindness or resources, not just for mental health, but sort of on a more general level. And their number's 0303 123 9999. We will be putting all these numbers at the end of the podcast, so we'll be able to actually access some of those as well. And it's nothing also beats getting in touch with other people with visual impairment, to get more of a connection. If you are feeling isolated in general, whether you've got congenital blindness or you're going through the sight loss journey, whatever your situation, it is always helpful, or very often helpful, to get in touch with other people and form that support network and talk through some of these issues, because 10 to 1, you're not going to be on your own, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, although I said at the start of this that it kind of makes me uneasy because I don't want to give wrong information or make things worse. I think it's so important that we just talk about this stuff, because we may look at someone and say, they're handling it just so much better. They've got a total grasp on this, and I am just failing all over the shop. And it's just not true. I think all of us face the same sort of issues to different degrees, sure. But I think, just being honest, saying, you know what, I had a bad day today. I struggled. I I walked into a lamppost and I just went home to bed. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that. You're not failing. We're all going through it. And basically, we're all great and we're doing fine. And if you're not, there's help out there. And just talk to someone.
So finally, since we have Sally filling in for Garth, who is on parental leave, Sally, you are a parent of young children. So what is your one tip for Garth and Geordie? Do you have anything that you can pass on as a bit of wisdom in raising younglings?
Well, I far from got everything right, but I would say the one thing, I was just saying it to Garth earlier on, is sleep when your baby sleeps. If it's with babies, sleep when the baby sleeps, and try as hard as you can to look after yourself. That's the biggest thing. If you can, everyone says to me, and it's so right, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put the oxygen mask on or help anybody else out. You're the one resource that child or those children have got, and so you need to invest in yourself.
So there you go, Garth. Hope you're back with us soon when you feel up to it and actually sleep. But Sean, I think, come to think of it,
yes,
sleep deprived or not, we'll probably get the same quality out of Garth, wouldn't you say?
I don't think we'll notice any difference at all. Can I just say,
yep.
My tip is squeaky shoes or bells.
They are amazing, those squeaky shoes.
There's the blind aspect to parenting. Just some sort of noise-making device is necessary at all times.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they make quite a lot of noise themselves, but, even so, sometimes they go quiet and you need to know where they are. Yeah, the squeaky shoes, 100%. So good.
There you go, Garth. Good luck and we wish you all the best.
Yep, definitely.
Love you all.
And finally, if you want to send us feedback, you can send us email at sgk@theblind.ninja.
That's sgk@theblind.ninja.
That's sgk@theblind.ninja.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah, but it won't reach Sally, but if you have something for her, we'll pass it along.
Yes, if it's horrible, they won't, because I've told them they're not allowed.
Those numbers again, if you need to talk to someone, are here in the UK, the Samaritans on 116 123, or the RNIB Counselling Service on 0207 391 2186, or the RNIB General Helpline can be reached at 0303 123 9999. Outside of the UK, reach out to your sight loss organisation, be that the CNIB if you're in Canada, or the NFB or ACB and others in America. Also, you may have a local sight loss organisation closer to you than you think. Search for blind or sight loss organisations in your town. And of course, you can always just reach out to your doctor. Thanks. Look after yourself.